Welcome back to Detroit Next. I'm Malachi Barrett from BridgeDetroit.
Kari Frazier from Detroit is different.
This is a collaboration between our two organizations to bring you some solid, good information about municipal elections here in the year 2025.
Mhm.
Kari, you and I have been breaking down city council and municipal political issues for what, like 2 years now?
Yeah, because of your notebook. So, Bridge Detroit, you definitely want to follow what Bridge Detroit offers in your notebook and public comment. We talk weekly. In today's episode, really big, just talking about development. So, three powerful guests, all in that space, Black developers that are doing large projects, but really delivering home options for a lot of Detroiters because development is such a discussion. So, we're talking about the AMI, area median income, what's affordable housing, and so much more. This episode is a very rich episode as far as anyone thinking about what we're looking at in housing coming up.
Last week, we had mayoral candidate and District 7 City Council member Fred Durhal on to talk about his vision for development in the city. Uh, I feel like this is definitely one of the top, issues in this race. Development is such a broad concept, but like you're saying, we're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about amenities. How do you
Yes.
feel like this factors in for the race this year for mayor?
This is big because Fred Durrell really broke down a lot into his perspective of how the DDA can expand. And really, it brings home so much of what is spoke about on public comment and really throughout many places about tax money going into developing a lot of projects that are needed to sustain and keep a viable Detroit. And that is such a pivotal issue when we think of what exists here, because every dollar just counts so much. You look at the scarcity of options and the cost of everything going around. So if it's high cost for the person to develop a skyscraper, you can only imagine what that's like for the person just day to day and looking at the elephant in the room, the taxes.
Obviously, there's a lot of ways to look at how development in Detroit works, how it should work, what leaders should do to stimulate economic growth. And that's why we are bringing on three people who have direct experience in trying to get projects done in the city.
Mm.
Chase Cantrell is the executive director of Building Community Value. That is a nonprofit that teaches people how to buy and develop small commercial and residential properties. Also joining us is Richard Hosey, owner of Hosey Development LLC. Some call him the godfather of Detroit development. That is real. You'll hear it later.
Mhm.
He's taken on some big and complicated projects like the ongoing renovation of the Fisher 21 body plant. He's turning that dilapidated factory into hundreds of apartments. And last but not least is Sonya Mays. She's president and CEO of Develop Detroit, which is a nonprofit development organization that specializes in affordable and mixed income housing. First, I just want to talk about a couple of quick things that
Yeah.
have been going on in the race because there is always news. Attorney Todd Perkins launched his mayoral campaign from a recreation center in the North End. He drew a pretty good crowd. I counted close to 200 people that were there. And he pitched himself as a self made CEO, a neighborhood champion who would work with corporations to build some mutually beneficial partnerships, something we've heard of different kind of stripes from a couple of different candidates. I also took some time to meet with mayoral candidate Rogelio Landing, who is in support of a expansion of the city government. So definitely check back with bridgedetroit.com later for more coverage of our conversation. What's interesting, though, he wants the city to take over, the struggling public school system. He also wants to annex surrounding communities, even going so far as Ann Arbor.
Yeah, I think that that is something that is extremely provocative as an idea. And having those bold ideas will capture some attentions and hearts and minds. Hearing more to plan, I'm going to be looking for your article too. And Attorney Perkins. Attorney Perkins is a voice that a lot of people do know in community. I've known him for years. When I think of Perkins Law Group and what Perkins Law Group represents for people, for a long time, even handled a lot of municipal government politics in the city of Highland Park
Yep.
as their corporate counsel. So a lot of understanding of what could be looked at in negotiations. People are looking from that lens. This is heating up as an election with a lot of options. We're definitely looking for Detroit Next to welcome all these guests on, but everyone's looking for that forum.
I also want to highlight the end of budget negotiations, which has
Mhm.
been a particular pleasure for me to cover.
Yes.
It's been a showcase, I think, though, for two of the city council members who are running for mayor. We mentioned Fred Durhal earlier, as well as city council president Mary Sheffield, as they demonstrate their ability to deliver resources to residents.
Yes, because Council President Sheffield, now mayoral candidate Sheffield, was scheduled to be on this episode here, and a lot of the budget negotiations are still it's getting heavy.
Yeah.
It's some advocates coming down, talking transit and much more. So I'm really looking forward to how the budget will settle and how this is going to carry out, not just for the mayor's race, but also for council race, because it's been some council candidates that have been involved in a lot of these budget
They've been showing up
hearings.
to the hearings, yeah, which has been interesting to see. Don't worry, we're going to talk about the city council races soon. I know we've been really focused on mayoral, but that is coming. And lastly, I just want to bring up that Reverend Solomon Kinlock Jr., who we had on an earlier episode. He's flexing some of his organizing strength with his campaign and tapping, that massive church congregation with a March 29th voter engagement event that drew a bunch of supporters down to Cass Tech before spreading out to knock on doors in Detroit. So there is activity in the neighborhoods as this race starts to heat up. But today we are talking development. Stick with us for a great episode, I think, of Detroit Next. All right, joining me now is Richard Hosey. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on Detroit Next.
Thank you for having me here.
Let's talk development. So you are involved in some pretty big projects. The Fisher Body plant has been coming together over a couple of years. You're taking this old dilapidated factory and making housing out of it, right?
Yes.
Let's just go back to the beginning. How did you even decide to do this in the first place?
So 25 years ago, I was down in New Orleans, and this was a kind of a standard process of taking large factories and warehouses and cotton mills and turning them into housing as repurpose it. And so I've had it on my mind. I wanted to see, one of these larger buildings being done, and I just really like the Fisher Body factory. And so I was thinking about it. My partner, Greg Jackson, was thinking about it. We got together and said, "Oh, we're both thinking about it. Let's do it."
And just, I mean, it sounds like an easy decision to make. And now here we are. How many years later? When did you get started on this?
So we first talked about it in 2018, and we got it under contract in maybe 2021. So it's still been 4 years of working through the process of under contract to construction.
Walk me through some of the challenges that come with, renovating a large industrial site like this. When it comes to, the actual physical construction, but also like the financing, like what has been the toughest thing as you guys have embarked on this?
Yeah. So the financing tends to be one of the toughest parts. I mean, there's obviously the logistics of large scale construction, but it's, construction scales, right? So, the same thing you would do for 20,000 square feet, you're doing most of that for 600,000 square feet with a little bit larger pipes. But so Detroit does not have a very strong banking market. So inside the city, particularly, even outside the city, it's not the same as, say, Chicago, New York, where there's 10 banks competing. So here, there's actually, you're kind of wooing in the bank. And when you get to a larger project, you often need more than one bank.
So what is it about Detroit that is seen as risky by banks and investors?
Well, so originally, we had a very strong split between our suburbs and the city, particularly, say, pre-2010. And so I found personally when I was financing the Broadview Tower that people would call and say, "What do you think about Detroit?" And they called the people that they knew, and they were outside the city. And so people would go, "Oh, I never go there. It's a bad place. It's a bad investment." There was a lot of that. So that broke down. So now, but there's this overall resistance as well still to being in there. Second, banks traditionally have this Community Reinvestment Act, the CRA, and our CRA is actually split. So if you're in Chicago, then you can go into deep suburb Chicago, and the CRA is still picking up. So you can move out 20 miles, and that still gets picked up. And the areas that fit CRA need best tend to be in the city. So there's a federal requirement of investing a certain amount of money in Chicago by every bank that does business there every year or every 3-year cycle. And it's a big number. So it gives people this reason to be there in the first place. Our CRA somewhere, I believe around 2000, got split such that Oakland County is actually separate. And
Wow.
so their CRA is many multiples of what's needed in the city. So there's not this push to actually be there. So when I financed the Broderick Tower back in 2010, I used up the bank's 3-year requirement of CRA just on half of that deal. So so you don't have this federal push. It has to be something where people want to be there, because our CRA is so small inside the city
Wow.
because all our banks are around Big Beaver.
Your project has an affordable housing component as well. I hear a lot from folks who want to see more affordable housing, and when we talk about affordable, they want it to be more affordable as well. That a lot of what we're building that's deemed affordable is still kind of more expensive than the median incomes for the city. What is the challenge with that? I mean, I always hear that part of the issue is it's just really difficult for anybody doing these projects to get a sufficient return on their investment when we're really getting to that deepest level of affordability. What's your experience with that been like?
Yeah, so no, that's absolutely the case, such that um, particularly when you're doing gut rehab of large structures, it's easier to achieve, but like we were talking about kind of earlier, it's still tight on a single family or a 4-family, right? But we have some solid structures around the city that programs like Rehab and Ready and a lot of individual developers, building community value is teaching people to do it. And you can bring it online in a way that is more affordable or more capable of being affordable. But you still have that thing where you're spending money constantly in a hope that one day some of it will come back. And then needing to pull money out to do it again. So there's always going to be this financial push. But the other things are the social pushes, right? So when I got back home in 2008, what everyone talked about was concentrated poverty.
Mm.
And so it was like, please, someone put some market rate in the middle of the city because we have just concentrated poverty and we need to build a tax base. We need to have those social incentives that make grocery store owners act nicer than they were in 2008 because they looked at all their populations as just being impoverished people who had no choices. And so making sure you have this mix of incomes, I think is the key. And one of the things that we struggle with is when you start out at 80% low income housing, to get to a real mix of income, you're going to do heavily market rate for a long time. Because if everything adding to the 80% is really still 80% low income, then you're going to stay at 80% low income. And so but it feels uncomfortable, right? It feels like people are building nice new in the middle of the okay old.
Mm-hmm.
And
I hear that all the time, that it's like what's being built isn't for people in the neighborhood that it's being built in, right?
Right. But there's so many different things going on, right? We lost a stunning number of people. At first they were calling it white flight, and then they're like, oh, it looks like the black people are leaving too. And so it was a flight to better circumstances, better amenities, and so we have to woo everyone back in. We're losing the 80% AMI people right now. It's our southern, western, and far eastern suburbs have opened up in a way that they weren't before, probably along racial lines. And now those barriers are falling, and you are seeing downriver just absorb all the Detroiters that can move out there.
Joining me now is Sonya Mays, President and CEO of Develop Detroit, nonprofit developer specializing in affordable and mixed income housing. Is that right?
That's right.
Thank you so much for being here on Detroit Next.
Thanks for having me.
So we are talking about, the issues that are important for these mayoral and city council races this year. Development, affordable housing have continually come up in the conversations that we're having. I don't know. Let's just start broadly. Like, is it tough to get stuff done in Detroit right now in the development world? What is you dealing with on kind of a daily basis as you do your projects?
Yeah, this is definitely the most challenging macro environment for the work that I do that I've seen since I've been in this work. So I have been in housing development. This will be Develop Detroit's 10-year anniversary in
Congrats.
June. So very excited about that. And so my entry into this space comes after the Great Recession, so I want to qualify my next few remarks with that. But over the last 10 years in Detroit, this is definitely shaping up to be the toughest stretch that I've seen. This is shaping up to be a more difficult environment for development than the pandemic period was. The first time around with the Trump administration, when we had to figure out how to absorb tariffs on key materials that are important in housing. And so you have the return of tariffs on things like aluminum, steel, and lumber. You also have the interest rates environment is much more unfavorable for financing projects than it was a few years ago. And then you start to kind of layer on the stuff that's happening at the federal level, the state level, and the local level. And so you have the kind of the receding of the ARPA money, which had really been supporting a lot of the affordable housing work for the last few years. You have some changes at the state level with the kinds of things that they're focused on in terms of investment, plus also some shrinking of some resources that have been prevalent over the last few years. And then, of course, you have the challenge of an imminent leadership change
Mhm.
locally. So there's a lot that's going on right now that makes this pretty challenging.
Let's highlight the leadership change. I mean, how critical is it that we make the right choice in this? And what do you want to hear from the candidates who are running to be the next mayor?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first answer is pretty easy. I mean,
Yeah.
I have long been a big proponent of making as much as you want to pay attention to the federal conversation, and what's happening in DC is always important from a funding standpoint for affordable housing. And so I won't say that that doesn't matter, but as much as possible, I have always been interested in how do we get as effective and efficient at our local context as possible. And so who is in leadership positions always matters. And this is us coming up on a point where we're going to have a significant leadership change for the first time in 12 years. So I think that kind of goes without saying. What are some of the things that I'm looking for as the leader of a mission-based real estate development company? Um, I we are pretty growth focused. I have a fairly intimate understanding of this city's government and its history through bankruptcy and kind of where we are now.
In a world where we have high costs to build and we are, not getting a whole lot of, we as the investor, I'm not investing, but, people doing this work, uh, I have a hard time making a lot of revenue on these projects given the incomes in the city. What do we do about you mentioned maybe some potential strategies there. And there's a big gap in the financing that seems to make it really tough for people to want to invest in any kind of development because of it's really expensive and they don't expect to make much money off of it. So what do we do about that?
Well, I'm going to say this, and it's going to seem like it's super easy. This is really hard
Yeah.
work. All the easy strategies have already been implemented in Detroit, so I'll say that. Uh, there One way of looking at Detroit is the way you initially framed it, which is there's a cost problem here. Everything costs too much. It costs more than what people can afford. And so let's focus on the cost side of things. You have to do that. One of my answers of what I would have someone focus on is definitely around like how do we extract and make things more operationally efficient from the standpoint. But the other way of looking at Detroit is Detroit has an income problem.
Mhm.
And I actually think this is the better way to look at Detroit is to look at it through an income deficiency lens. And we know Detroit has an income issue because that area median income that we talked about a little bit earlier, if you compare what is the city of Detroit's true median income versus what it is when you include communities like Livonia and Warren. There is a very large gap.
Yeah.
And so the housing solving the housing problem, there's a cost element to it, but I don't believe you can do that in a vacuum apart from dealing with the income issue. And that's why I'm a big proponent of focusing on middle class strategies. And again, very specifically, middle class strategies that are growth oriented, that are helping the overall city get bigger, but are also very thoughtfully aligned on how you move existing Detroiters to a place where they have reliably greater incomes. And that's really tough work, right? That's really, really tough work. And it's particularly difficult. I didn't mention this earlier in my sort of macro, what's going on in the macro environment context, but it's particularly challenging to think about how do you move incomes up in what is probably a once in a generation shift in how work happens in society. And with that, I'm thinking about artificial intelligence, AI, kind of the changes in mobility technology. And so we're probably at a cusp of just wholesale change in the way who performs what type of work. And so thinking about all of that through that lens is pretty challenging. But I have looked at this ad nauseum for 10 years, and I don't think we are going to get out of our housing problem by just trying to deal with the cost side of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got to raise people's incomes as well. To bring us full circle and to end off our conversation here, are you optimistic about the future of the city?
I am. I don't think you can be a Detroiter and not be optimistic about the future of Detroit. It's just like it's who we are. We're tough times are part of our lineage, if you will, and this is, I think the next couple of years are going to be kind of tough, but they're going to be tough for everybody. It's going to be tough across the country. And so I'm optimistic though, because we always find a way in Detroit. Like we always figure it out. I think there's a tremendous opportunity right now to elect someone who is visionary, but also someone who is a good administrator of day-to-day government, and um, and and hopefully that person will be able to kind of lay out a new vision for Detroit that includes greater investment in middle class incomes, middle class housing, middle class job opportunities, while continuing our pretty solid trajectory of getting the city, looking better, feeling better, operating better.
All right, joining us now on Detroit Next is Chase Cantrell. He's the executive director of Building Community Value. I think what you guys do is really cool because you're actually training people how to enter the development world.
We are.
Tell me more about that. How does that work?
Yeah, so this is our 9th year doing it, and it came about from a professor at the University of Michigan who had been teaching real estate in Ann Arbor for 30 years, and basically he thought Detroiters needed to learn the same information that Ann Arbor students were learning. So he got a free room at the Detroit Center, UM Detroit Center at Mack and Woodward. He recruited some help in the School of Social Work, and he started asking Detroiters who wanted to learn. So I started Building Community Value a year later, and he handed off that course to Building Community Value. We've been doing it for 9 years after that. And the goal really is to meet Detroiters where they are. I'm a Detroiter. We all have aspirations. We see those vacant properties in our neighborhoods that we all dream about. It's like, all right, this could be XYZ. How do I get that property? How do I do a development? How do I interact with government? This feels frustrating. Where do I go? Who do I talk to? Right. So we're leading people through that process. And making sure we're actually at a meeting with a student right before this. We want to make sure that people don't lose money, right? Because what a lot of people do is they buy these properties from the land bank cheaply, don't really know how development works, and soon they're starting to put thousands of dollars into a property that the land bank might take back. So we
I
want
think
to
last year they had a record number or the highest number of reconveyances
back
from
to the land bank, which doesn't serve anybody, right? It doesn't help the land bank, doesn't help the city, and it certainly doesn't help the Detroit residents. So we're trying to avoid people from going through that process and helping people to make sure that their development projects are successful.
So you came into this world after a career change, and I've read you've been inspired to help Black residents here build wealth, and I think this is a concept of generational wealth building that comes up a lot. I don't know that people really understand development as a way to get into that. Why was that important to you? And how has that been going in terms of like a actual kind of pathway for people to build wealth in the city?
So one, it is a wealth building tool, but a lot of people come into the course for a lot of different reasons, right? Some people come into the course, again, they want to beautify their neighborhood. They're frustrated with the other development projects that are happening that don't seem reflective of what they want to see in their community. People want power and control over their own destinies. They see this as one route to do that. So the wealth building is just one part of it, and only just one portion of the people who are in the class. But it's difficult, right? These deals are challenging for anyone to do. What we see often is that, it may take more money than the property is actually worth to bring a property back to life. So what do I mean? You might need to put $100,000 into a single family home in Detroit to fully rehab it to the quality where it's safe and habitable for a family. The market might say it's only worth $70,000. That gap is what we're all challenged with. Government, developers, community members. How do we make sure that we're actually revitalizing our neighborhoods when that kind of gap exists? So it's actually very difficult to build wealth in this way in a lot of places. There are a lot of neighborhoods where the value just isn't there. And the people who are doing the work are doing it because they're passionate about it, right? And looking for the resources to make it happen. But a lot of these have to be long-term holds in order to really build any wealth.
So what tools are available for smaller developers to cross that gap that we're talking about? I always hear the perception that it's harder for smaller developers to get financing compared to some of the larger projects that we're seeing, right? I think there's some systemic reasons behind that. There's some probably legal reasons around the way that some of these development tools, like the transformational brownfield program, which was created basically to help Dan Gilbert get some projects done.
It's created by lobbyists, yeah.
And will be, there's going to be a debate in Lansing about adding more money into that fund for the latest Gilbert project at the Renson. A lot of the folks coming into your class do not have that same access to capital. So
none of them are billionaires.
Yeah, no billionaires in the BVC classes. So yeah, tell me about that. Like, what is the challenge, particularly for people who are entering this for the first time, in getting help from the banks, help from the city?
Yeah. So I think there's a misperception that, it definitely is harder for the folks who are doing 1 to 4 units, right? That scale. Over 60% of the housing in Detroit is single family detached. Like, that's really what we have in the city. But if you are a Black developer doing a single family detached home, or if you are doing a 80 unit apartment building, right? Getting banks to lend, like an actual bank, not a we can talk about the other kinds of financial institutions, but getting a bank to lend is almost impossible in the city, right? There are very few banks lending for our projects. So if you're seeing a large affordable housing project in the city, it's likely not a bank. It's a community development financial institution. That's a nonprofit financial institution. There's subsidy, there's all kinds of things, but it's not banks. So we're experiencing at the single family level the same thing. You go to a bank, most of them look at it as a real estate investment, and that's not a product that they provide. So people are turning to what's called hard money lenders. These are lenders who usually charge really high interest rates, so much higher than banks and CDFIs. You might be at the 10, 12, 14% interest rate to get this kind of lending, but it's usually pretty quick and pretty efficient, and they're just looking at the value of the asset, and that's basically pretty much it. So people are using that, or they're using their own capital.
Is that a good tool? I mean, that sounds a little risky at 14% interest rate.
It's risky, but what we're doing is we're making sure people have a firm understanding of all the costs. How much will it cost to acquire the property, rehab the property? Is there a contingency in place? There has to be. Will the deal work at that interest rate level? And if it does, it does. You go ahead and do it. You're not making as much money as you would have otherwise, but you still may be making some that may make it worthwhile. But we have to have that analysis before we encourage a student to do something.
The DEGC has been doing an education series on tax incentives to help people understand how all of that works. And often I hear them say that people are misinformed and they're given bad information about how tax incentive works, and that's why people are so upset with it. How important is how important is civic education to all of this? Not only to make sure that people are coming to the table and knowing what they're advocating, but also to maybe push back on some of these potentially unfair characterizations of where people's understanding is at.
People understand what they want to see in their community, right? So some of the pushback is culturally what you are building does not reflect the neighborhood, right? So just from that starting point, right, you don't need to have an economics understanding of a development project to know that.
Mhm.
Other parts of it is people are trying to access the system and know that they're unable to get a house from the land bank, right? That house across the street that I keep talking about. So you don't need to understand a pro forma to understand those kinds of policies. But civic education is important, right? When we're talking, especially when we're talking about our larger development projects and the community benefits ordinance process. I sit on the Equitable Development Task Force for the City of Detroit. We are reviewing the community benefits ordinance. And one of the things that we look at is when a neighborhood advisory council, residents who are elected to this council have to represent their neighbors. Many of them don't understand, again, the economics of a deal, and they're negotiating with teams who are very sophisticated and have, lawyers and real estate specialists who do understand the nuances and details. So civic education, especially when it comes to really large projects, is extremely important.
I'm glad you brought that up. I've watched a handful of these community benefits negotiations now from start to finish.
Me too.
And they are a little frustrating in that you see the expertise deck being stacked against residents, the people who serve on these and for folks that don't know, the community benefits ordinance, on paper is a very powerful tool. We passed a kind of neutered version of a different proposal that might have been a little bit stronger, but in general, it requires developers who are pursuing pretty massive projects and seeking public financing to sit down with a group of residents who represent the surrounding kind of area and negotiate benefits in exchange for the tax breaks that they're hoping to get from the city. And so, if used well, that could be something that really creates a lot of additional investment in neighborhoods. But I think, to your point, folks don't come with this understanding, and they're up against people that, it's their job and they've gotten a lot of training and are paid a lot of money to do these projects. What are the shortcomings of that ordinance, do you think? I mean, I've talked with Council President Sheffield about the need to reform it.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen anything actually presented at this point.
Nothing's been presented yet, and I don't know that there's a huge appetite to change it until probably after this election.
Yeah.
But one is the speed, right? Like these meetings happen very quickly, and there aren't that many of them. So you have to, if you are a resident elected to the neighborhood advisory council, you have to get up to speed very quickly. Which is difficult. There is some training that the city provides, but it's provided by the city, not a trusted third party. So they are not represented by external counsel. So that's a few shortcomings. And then the mayor and city council appoint most of the NAC. So there's only 2 members of that committee that actually get appointed by their neighbors. So even just thinking of who sits on these committees, a lot of them themselves are connected in some way to either the development infrastructure or the elected infrastructure. So there's some shortcomings that could be improved.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Detroit Next. And if you're loving what we're doing with this content, you already know it could definitely use your support. But more than your support, you can get involved. You can call 313-284-6407, right? So this is a hotline that you're going to call, and we're going to drop this into the episode. So make sure you keep it clean, right? But we definitely want to get that spirited thought process, because engagement is a part of why we're doing this, right? This is a community-driven effort. So all this information is for you. The best way it's going to be for you is if you're in it as well. Detroit Next is a community-led project from Bridge Detroit, and Detroit is different, which means we can't do this without you. If you have a question or comment for Detroit Next, remember, call that number, 313-284-6407, and leave a message. It could appear on this podcast, right? Leave that message. If you would like what we're doing, head to bridgedetroit.com/donate and help us keep this free for everyone. You know you want to watch this for free and share, because this is where you're getting a lot of the information and a lot of the interviews. You can also subscribe and get our newsletter for free and stay up to date on all of our reporting at Bridge Detroit. Head to Bridge Detroit on YouTube to get all of this and more of the full episodes. Plus, you can go behind the scenes and get the full interviews from each episode as well. You can find the audio version of the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and DetroitNext.podbean. podbean.com. We'll be doing this all year long, so stay with us and follow BridgeDetroit.com and DetroitisDifferent.com on your favorite social media platforms. Peace.
Detroit Next is a community-led project from Bridge Detroit and Detroit is Different, which means that we can't do this work without you. We need your support. If you have a question or a comment and want to participate in this process throughout the year, give us a call. We have a phone line set up at 313-284-6407. Leave us a message and we'll play it on the podcast. If you like what we're doing, head to bridgedetroit.com and subscribe to our newsletters. All of that content, again, is free, no paywalls for anybody. We're trying to make this as accessible as possible. Head to our YouTube channel to get full episodes and interviews along with extra content throughout the year. You can also find the audio version of this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and DetroitNext.podbean.com. We're going to be doing this all year long, so stay with us. Follow Bridge Detroit and Detroit is Different on your favorite social media platforms and take this ride with us. Thanks.